Um, in this video, I will make brief comments about the book Faustian Man in a Multicultural Age by Ricardo Duchesne, the Canadian alt-right author. And for those who would stumble randomly upon this video, but there's no such thing as random, everything is eternally logically determined by God, so yeah. I consider myself as what Hegel calls the negative. I have developed this idea in other videos, and the way I see things, my purpose is to realize absolute idealism, which means an absolute understanding of the whole of reality. And this is a dialectical process because by bringing forth reasons and explanations for all the thoughts and behaviors and phenomena which exist in reality, I will prove that they are not free. And so if you remove the idea of freedom from a phenomenon or a behavior, you remove the idea of responsibility, and therefore you save in a Christian sense by removing the shame. It's Nietzsche who said that the greatest virtue is to remove the shame, that someone, to prove someone that he or she should not be ashamed of his or her behavior or thoughts. That's the greatest gift you can make. And in my view, only God is free, and the purpose of man is to become identical with God, to realize his freedom and also his responsibility. That's a dialectical process. But anyway, I will just briefly comment on the preface of this book by Ricardo Duchesne, and he says, every intellectual who experiences significant changes in his outlook will realize that in the course of his long journey of questionings and re-evaluations, one may have been driven by impulses that were already there since childhood. My personal childhood as an empirical individual, my first memory was that I had brought shame to my father, and that I had I missed my father, and I felt the love for my father by missing him. And 30 years later, or not 30, but 27 years later, I have come to realize that my real father and the father of all humans is God. And God in his abstraction is what the Christians call the logos, the eternal world. In the realm of Hegel, it is logic. And the trinity of logic, nature, spirit is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is the reconciliation of the Son with the Holy Father. And it can only be realized in speculative thinking. So I agree with Ricardo Duchesne is that behind every intellectual endeavor, there is a primordial impulse to solve the inner conflicts within the very soul of man. He says, that's very interesting, I have traveled the full spectrum of both fashionable and unfashionable intellectual Western currents. I, as an empirical individual, I have traveled most of the spectrum from left and right, the most crazy ideas in both political views. And spirit and spirituality only exists within men who have explored the dark parts of their nature and who have moved, because spirit is in a constant movement, because it's a dialectical movement of self-negation, and spirit is always moving and always surpassing itself, always transcending itself. And the most spiritual men in the entire history of mankind are those who have succeeded in realizing a unity of opposites after having gone through the full spectrum of intellectual and emotional endeavors. And Ricardo Duchesne is a spiritual man, and he must be praised for that. And he said he started with a strong attraction to Third World revolutionary writings, Soviet Marxism, Marxist humanism, New Left authors, existentialism, phenomenology, materialism, middle-of-the-road liberalism, Hegel, Nietzsche, and Weber. And I will try to show to Ricardo Duchesne and those who support him, and he's a spiritual man and he's worthy of admiration for that, that his process was Hegelian, because the process of spirit is a Hegelian process. And he said that all this, his spiritual journey culminated in uniqueness. It's the title of one of his books, The Product of a Decade's Work. And the uniqueness of Western civilization is to conceptually grasp the one in the many and the many in the one. And I will explain more on that later. What is unique about Western civilization is that Westerners have gone further than any other people in the grasping of multiplicity in unity with unity. And the ultimate triumph of Western man would be to understand that multiculturalism is a gift to Western civilization because it enables to realize its own concept, that of the absolute conceptual understanding of the totality of being, which is absolute idealism, the most Western thought current, but also non-Western thought current, because it's beyond West and East and North and South and beyond all opposites. It's the unity of everything. So yeah. He says that the established interpretations of Western uniqueness is a focus on science, industry, law, and peaceful culture generally. So the modern Western leftist view of Western culture is the West with the politically correct and good aspects of Western civilization and not the bad ones. But you cannot have one without the other. He says that Nietzsche gave me the psychological motivation that led me to investigate the primordial historical roots of the West among barbarian, energizing, horse-riding Indo-European speakers. So that's a dialectical process, is that this politically correct, peaceful state of things in the West brought about by Western liberalism brings about its own negation in a revival of barbaric fantasies about the Western past that you find in some pagan circles and right-wing, extreme right-wing circles. They don't understand that they are the very negation of they are the product of their own era in a way. But yeah. He thought that there was something wrong about the nature of contemporary liberalism and rationalism. It's because liberalism and rationalism is a product of the understanding. It's abstract universality. It's a one-sided grasping of things, and it doesn't include its opposite within itself. That's not a full conceptual understanding. And he said that the suppression in our culture of male affirmation and primordial identity, but the absolute male, the absolute man, in the writings of Weininger, who was a Jew, is the one who can bring together logic, ethics, and memory. And Ricardo Duchesne is a moment in the process of the re-establishment of intellectual absolute manhood, because he brings together in a logical thread, and he brings about the memory of the West, and he has the courage to defend non-politically correct ideas. But I will keep going. So he found the alt-right, and which awakened him to the biological aspect of the West's Faustian soul, so that he understood that you cannot completely negate biology, but it is a part of the process of spiritual development, because the purpose of spiritual development is to become whole again and to include all aspects of existence within yourself. And biology is a part of existence. He says that race is a factor that must be taken just as seriously, not more seriously, but it has to be considered proportionately to its meaning, and it is meaningful. It's not the error is to make race too important a factor, or not important enough. It has to be balanced, and the proper measure, which is the logical determination, with economics, religion, ideas, geography, culture, and demography. And he's already starting to adopt a holistic view of things, that all elements are interconnected, and that's what makes him a spiritual man, because spirit is the inclusion within itself of contradictory, opposed determinations, and not this one-sidedness of der Verstand. So he noticed that race was an important factor in the founding of Western civilization. It was not the sole factor, but it was important. And you have, in your spiritual process, you have to acknowledge this, that there exists, to a certain extent, biological determinism. But the highest point of view that you can adopt is that race is a spiritual construct. In the process of development, you will first believe that spirituality is a racial belief, but the true spirit understands that race is a byproduct of spirit, and that all races have their own spirituality, which in essence is one. But that's the highest understanding that you can arrive at. And then he mentions, that liberalism and rationalism is disconnected from the tragic and dark side of human nature, which is the separation of peoples into races, because the tragic is the separation, and the tragic aspect of man's existence is that he is a singularized being with a universal thought. And there's a conflict within man between his singularity and his universality. His universality belongs to God, and his singularity belongs only to himself. And this is what Hegel calls the negative, which must be aufgehoben and transcended. And the unity with the divine must be realized through a cognitive, intellectual understanding. So wherever there is separation, there is tragedy, and man is a tragic being. And it is only through God and in God that tragedy can be appeased, and unity can be brought back to itself, and sorrow can be vanished, and can vanish, and peace can be reestablished. He says that we should blame cultural Marxism, but my channel, Cultural Hegelianism, when I thought about it, it was in 2018, it was a dialectical response to cultural Marxism, because there was Hegel, then Marx, then the failure of Marxism, and then cultural Marxism, and I thought that now it was time for Hegel to come back, but not the old Hegel, but a new Hegel, which would have incorporated the cultural aspect of Marxism into itself and become cultural Hegelianism. And I'm starting to realize that cultural Hegelianism is the truth of Hegelianism, and it must include within itself the conceptual understanding of Marxism and cultural Marxism, and the conceptual understanding of everything, actually. So yeah. I will stop there for now. And the only thing that I want to add is that Ricardo Duchesne should understand himself as being a moment in the development of absolute spirit. He's the negation of cultural Marxism, but he does not understand himself as this negative moment. And by negating the negation of European, he's also asserting European identity. So the negation of the negative is an affirmative and positive moment, and this is the entire philosophy of Hegel, which explains that. So, yeah.